So listen to this.
So listen.
We've had
We're out of practice, okay?
we've had a lot of ups and downs since October.
We did not mean to take a little hiatus, but we are back and we are refreshed, and we have gone through some trials and tribulations.
Trials and tribulations, man.
But we're back, and
We're
we're happy to be
back.
back, and we're so glad to see you. Mwah.
So let's jump into our cases.
So imagine it is late on August 16th, 1996, in Milan, Tennessee. A calm, ordinary night until suddenly it isn't. A 14-year-old girl is gone, leaving no clues behind. This is the disappearance of Casey McDaniel.
So, on the evening of August 15th, Casey attended a back-to-school dance at Double Springs Cumberland Presbyterian Church, and afterwards, a family friend named Pam King drove her home and watched her walk inside. She reportedly unlocked the door and went in while Pam waited outside. And then around 1:30 to 2 a.m., Casey's mother, Cindy, and her boyfriend returned home to find the back door slightly opened, Casey's TV still on in her room, a bowl of cookies and a glass of milk sat on the floor, and the clothes she had worn to the dance laid out. But Casey was gone.
There were no signs of forced entry, no immediate clues pointing to her whereabouts. But Casey's mother didn't panic at first. Casey often stayed with friends, and the family didn't have a home phone at the time. But by early morning, when calls were made from a neighbor's house, it became clear. Casey wasn't with anyone and was officially reported missing the next day. Search teams and cadaver dogs were brought in. Authorities initially considered both runaway scenarios and abduction or foul play. Investigators focused heavily on ponds near the area. In one of the ponds, dogs alerted strongly, so the entire pond was drained. Clothes were recovered, but none of them belonged to Casey. Another pond was searched years later with similar results, and no remains and nothing connected to Casey.
And rumors spread quickly across Milan. Some believed Casey had been buried under the elementary school during constructions, and others claimed they've seen her at local fairs or stores. Now, none of these reports were ever confirmed, and I grew up here my whole life, and I remember kids telling me about Casey McDaniel being buried underneath the school, but I never knew who they were talking about until years later. And as investigators dug into Casey's disappearance, one name kept resurfacing: Finis Ewan, or Pete Hill, known to Casey as Uncle Pete. Hill was a family acquaintance who now has a disturbing history of his own that includes an attempt kidnapping in 2002. Casey's mother later said that Hill had made unwanted advances towards her in the past. She believed he may have come to the house that night expecting her, but found Casey alone instead. However, his later actions would lead one to believe that Casey was the target all along. And for years, Hill avoided charges because his wife provided an alibi for him, and that alibi would eventually fall apart.
The FBI reopened Casey McDaniel's case in 2018. Using new forensic technology, they returned to Casey's home and conducted a full evidence sweep. They also determined that Pete Hill's alibi on the night of her disappearance was false, so authorities set up a sting operation. Hill traveled to Mississippi to meet and engage in intercourse with someone that he thought was a 16-year-old. During the exchange, he told the person that he thought was the girl's mother that he had been intimate with a 14-year-old in the past. And though not directly linked to Casey, this eventually led to his arrest. In 2019, a grand jury indicted Pete Hill for multiple charges: premeditated first-degree murder, felony murder, aggravated rape with bodily injury, and aggravated rape with a deadly weapon. After 23 years, investigators finally acknowledged him as the primary suspect.
In August of 2022, Hill entered what's known as a best interest plea. He did not directly admit guilt, but he agreed that there was enough evidence to convict him. He pled guilty to second-degree murder and abuse of a corpse. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison and served at 100%, followed by 6 years of probation. As part of the plea, Hill agreed to tell authorities where he believed Casey's remains were located, and searches were conducted despite providing information and authorities conducting multiple searches. Nothing was found.
Multiple witnesses reported seeing unfamiliar vehicles near the house the night that she vanished. Others claimed to see a girl resembling Casey in nearby towns as well. Investigators followed each lead, but the trail always went cold, and to this day, Casey's remains have never been recovered.
Casey Lynn McDaniel was just 14 years old, and her disappearance left a lasting mark on her family and on the entire town of Milan. Though her case is no longer classified as unsolved, her story is incomplete until she is brought home.
If you have any information about Casey McDaniel, contact the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation at 1-800-TBI-FIND. Every detail matters, and even after almost 3 decades, answers are still possible.
This is the story of Casey Lynn McDaniel, a girl who never got to grow old, whose case spanned generations, and whose disappearance still leaves a hole of unanswered questions. Alright, for our next case, I want you to close your eyes and picture a lonely Tennessee back road in the early hours before sunrise. The kind of darkness that feels heavy, like the world is holding its breath. A sheriff and his wife drive into that darkness, and a man known for surviving shootings, stabbings, and attacks that would have killed anyone else. A man locals saw as invincible, and a man who walked tall.
But on this night, the story isn't about survival. It's about the moment his legend split in two, and the truth of what happened on New Hope Road became buried under fear, blood, secrets, and a version of events that never quite made sense. Because this isn't just a story about a sheriff, it's a story about power, control, violence behind closed doors, and a woman whose final moments may have been nothing like the story that the world was told.
This is the real story of Buford and Pauline Pusser, and the investigation that decades later revealed something far more disturbing than an ambush. We're pulling back the curtain on one of Tennessee's most famous legends, and we're starting at the moment it all began to unravel.
Buford Pusser. You hear that name in Tennessee, and people still have a reaction. Some see a hero, a sheriff who took on bootleggers and organized crime with nothing but grit and a wooden club. Others see something darker, a man who lived on violence and left a trail of it behind him. But the real story isn't the movie version. It's what happened when the public image, the local rumors, and the evidence didn't match. And at the center of it all is the death of his wife, Pauline.
Buford was born in 1937 and grew up tall, intimidating, and unafraid of confrontation. He served briefly as a Marine, became a professional wrestler, and then stepped into law enforcement. And by the age of 25, he had become a police chief. And by the age of 27, he was appointed the youngest sheriff in Tennessee history. And he jumped into that job like he had something to prove.
His war wasn't subtle. Illegal gambling, bootlegging, the state line gang, violent, organized, and deeply connected. And Buford went at them with a level of force that made his own deputies uneasy. He survived things that most officers never would have: 8 shootings, 7 stabbings, brutal beatings, car crashes, and assassination attempts. Locals began calling him Buford the Bull, and sometimes it felt like he wanted the violence, not avoiding it, but inviting it.
Buford and Pauline married in 1959, and people said they looked picture perfect, the sheriff and his beautiful young wife raising a daughter together. But years later, when investigators reopened Pauline's case, they found signs that her life with Buford wasn't as perfect as he claimed. A previous broken nose, bruise noted in old descriptions, and witness statements that hinted at a different marriage behind closed doors. None of it was proof on its own, but together it painted a picture of a woman who might have been living in fear long before the night she died.
August 12th, 1967, at 4 a.m., a phone call wakes the house. Buford answers it, and Pauline insists on riding with him, too uneasy to let him go alone. The road was empty, just them, the darkness, and the sound of tires on gravel. Then headlights appear. A car pulled beside them and a gunfire exploded through the windows. The bullet hit Pauline first, then Buford, his jaw nearly blown apart. He barely managed to drive away before collapsing in the road. When deputies arrived, Pauline was already dead. Buford was mutilated but alive, and from that night on, his story became legendary. But decades later, investigators would look back at this scene and notice something alarming. Almost nothing about it lined up with the physical evidence.
The Buford that McNairy County saw after Pauline's death wasn't the same man. He became colder, more violent, and relentless. He hunted the state line gang like he was possessed, and the men suspected of Pauline's murder started dying one by one. Carl Douglas Towhead White was shot to death. George McGain was murdered in Texas, and Gary McDaniel was killed shortly after. Rumors say Buford ordered the hits. Some even claimed he pulled the trigger himself. But everyone had the same thought: with his reputation, who would dare investigate him?
On August 21st, 1974, Buford left a local fair, got into his Corvette, and drove into the night. Minutes later, the car left the road, slammed into an embankment, and exploded into flames. No autopsy was done, no thorough investigation, just rumors of sabotage, alcohol, and mechanical tampering. The only person who could answer the questions surrounding Pauline's death died, with all of his secrets still locked behind him.
For decades, Pauline's death was treated as a tragic part of Buford's life story until 2022 when the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation reopened the case. They reviewed photos, autopsy notes, crime scene details that no one had questioned in the 60s, and slowly the story started to fall apart. Blood splatter on the hood of the car, not inside, cranial injuries that didn't match the car's interior, and Buford's gunshot, the one he claimed came from the attackers, was a close contact shot, meaning it was likely self-inflicted.
In 2024, investigators exhumed Pauline's body after a tip about the potential murder weapon. Her injury supported the theory that she was shot outside of the car and moved afterward. By 2025, the TBI announced the conclusion almost no one ever expected. If Buford were alive today, prosecutors would present his case to a grand jury for the murder of Pauline. Over 1,000 pages of evidence, and none of it matched the hero story.
In Tennessee, people still argue about who Buford really was: a hero, a monster, a man shaped by violence, or a man who chose it. And Pauline, young, quiet, and silenced far too early, has waited decades for her truth to rise to the surface.
Tonight, we looked past the legend, past the movie, and past the myth of the sheriff who walked tall. And what we found was a story far darker than the one that the world was told. So, we shared two different stories tonight. How do you feel about that?
I like switching it up. We
I
also
li-
changed our little seating arrangement happening,
Welcome to my humble abode.
but I've grown up hearing a lot about Casey McDaniel.
See, I moved around a lot in my childhood, and I did not grow up in Milan. I think you mentioning it was the first time that I'd heard of her.
Yeah, I moved to Milan when I was in the second grade. And in like elementary school, like when you're in like the third, fourth grade, and all of middle school, people are like, there's a kid buried underneath the elementary school. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then I didn't find out like fully about her until like my dad told me about her and stuff like that.
We want to be sensitive to the fact that her family is still local as well.
Yes.
Um, we are not mentioning her to bring any kind of legend, any kind of.
Hurt towards anybody.
We just want to get her story out there because, as somebody who has lived here for a few years now, I'd never heard of it. And that is something that, I mean, we can still pass by her house now.
Hmm. We don't mean any harm towards any of the stories that we tell in the future and in the past and right now. We're just trying to bring knowledge to the stories that we have heard and are being told so we can give more coverage on it for other people who may know something if it's still unsolved.
This is our local history. We can't escape it. We're not going to get rid of it. Um, we want to embrace the fact that some of these things are still unsolved. Like you said, I mean, if we can bring more awareness to that and get more people listening to them, then I think that's the best we can do. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight.
We apologize again for being gone so long. You know, life takes its turns, and you just gotta go through it. It's a roller coaster, and you go through it.
But thanks for welcoming us back with open arms. We intend to stay. We are here, and we have some cool stuff in the works for you.
None, I love you.
Night night, love you.